it actually happened. It's irrelevant to me whether or not there was a Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
The story has very interesting implications as a parable. It's talking about, just look at the two characters. Eve is sophisticated. It says before she eats the fruit, she sees that it's good for eating, and she sees that it's beautiful, and she doesn't eat it for those two reasons. She eats it. She violates the only commandment they had. She risks death for wisdom. That's a sophisticated argument that it's worth taking a risk for wisdom, whereas Adam, her man,
mm-hmm.
he just eats it when he hands it to him. He's got no brain whatsoever. He's like Homer Simpson with a donut. So, it's talking about sophistication versus non-sophistication, women versus men. A lot of stuff you could get out of that. The
mm-hmm.
value of wisdom. But history is something else, and I don't think you find it in those earlier stories. I do think there's evidence corroborated by outside texts that Jesus was a real historical character, that he did die on the cross along with tens of thousands of other Jews
mm-hmm.
back then for confronting. He didn't die. I think the history, the record would suggest that he didn't die because he challenges the priesthood of the Jews. I think he dies because he challenges the empire of Rome, and he is crucified for that. Does he rise on the third day? That's a faith statement. There's no history for that. So there are some things you can say are historical, some things you have to take. If you're a believer, you take on faith. But as a non-believer of, let's say, the resurrection, I'm not a Christian, so I don't believe that Jesus is the Christ, and
mm-hmm.
he died for my sins and was resurrected on the third day. But I still think there's tremendous meaning in the story about, just on the lower level, dying for what you believe in.
Sure.
But in the resurrection itself, saying that what he believed in could not be killed even by the Roman authorities. So there's so many ways to take these stories that keep them alive and meaningful in my life without having to make them literal, and then you lose me. I had this discussion just not too long ago with a Catholic priest about Jesus' ascension to heaven, and I said it's a bodily ascension, and he said yes, and I said, well, the body can only move at a certain speed before it just, let alone how it survives in outer space, but just based on the speed that the body could move, Jesus hasn't left the galaxy yet, let alone make it to heaven. And he says, well, God can do whatever he wants. It's a miracle. Jesus can move faster. Rather than say it's a metaphor for something else, and let's explore what that something else is. So, again, when you try to make the Bible history or you try to make the Bible science, I think you're missing the message of the Bible. And that's true of the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and all the sacred texts.
Rabbi, do you think there will ever come a time in this planet's history, and I'm sure this will happen, if it does happen long after you and I depart and meet at that meeting place we were talking about in the commercial break, where all the religions of the world will come together as one?
No, I think that religion ultimately, despite the way it goes about it, that religion is really driven by the human quest for meaning,
mm-hmm.
and I think that we're way too creative, innovative, inventive, imaginative to come up with one set of meanings, and that this is it. I think that what could happen is that religions will realize that they are meaning-making machines, and people can just cross from one to the other looking for different truths and creating their own sense of what reality is. So there's no religious war, but will we ever get down to one religion? I think that would be a disaster, because I think that would mean a loss of the human imagination.
But wouldn't one religion get rid of all the animosity that is between different cultures, different social groups because of the religion? Wouldn't that get rid of, well,
that's true. If we all, so would one politics, so would one nation, so would, all the divisions, if we could reduce them all. But I think then we'd end up with such a vanilla mind that it just doesn't sound very exciting to me. The thing is not to make them all one. The thing to realize is that none of them are true. Republicans are, I'm in the United States, so
sure.
So Democrats aren't true, and Republicans aren't true, and the liberals in Canada aren't true, and the conservatives in Canada aren't true. Yeah. It's simply other ways of making meaning, and we could, as individuals, draw from all of them to make for meaning in our own lives and to vote however we're going to vote. But if we only had one school of thought or one political party, I mean, that's more frightening than the diversity that we do have. I mean, democracy is based on the fact of splintering and keeping any one group from taking power. So I would not look forward to that.
Is it possible, Rabbi, that we've just outgrown religion?
We have outgrown, our religions are basically, I shouldn't say all of them. There are exceptions. There are new religions being born all the time. But the root religions, are from 2,000, 2,500 years ago, Buddhism, earlier than that, Hinduism. Our current strongest religions are rooted in a time that is so alien to ours. I don't think we're going to get rid of religion. I think we have to wonder why, in an age of space exploration. I mean, we have religions of Noah's Ark, and we live in a time of the space shuttle, or used to, and that makes no sense to me. When I look at the cosmos, and I look at quantum mechanics, and I watch the Fabric of the Cosmos television show about what we know to be true from a scientific perspective. And I'm not a reductionist. I think there's more to the universe than science can reveal.
Sure.
Meaning is something science can't tap. But when I look at the amazing reality of the physical world, that is far more powerful to me as a spiritual experience, as an experience of awe and wonder and mystery, than reading chapter 1 of Genesis. It's just, they couldn't imagine what we can actually see. And I don't understand why we aren't seeing a new kind of religion developing, a new quest for meaning that blends, science and art, literature, and spiritual practice into something much more fulfilling than reading ancient text and somehow pretending that their worldview is superior to ours.
Wouldn't it be possible, Rabbi, for the senior members of any clergy or any religious sect to say, well, you know what, let's bring our church, our belief system into the present and take this attitude where they look at the world today with what we know today and understand the significance and the challenges and the wonderment that we actually have using modern day technology?
I think that's actually happening in some areas. I mean, the Catholic Church is one of the most advanced astrophysics labs anywhere. I mean, they do a lot of looking at the cosmos and somehow making that work for them. I think the Dalai Lama came out not so recently, but long, a decade ago probably, and he said, look, if science can disprove a tenet of Buddhism, then we have to change the tenet of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Science will win. That's how it should work. I want my religion to relate to science, and if science can show me what's true, and I've been saying the opposite or something else, I'll change what I say. So I think that happens. In fact, the current issue of the Reform Judaism Rabbi's Journal is all about science and the impact of science, and a look at process theology, seeing God not as a being, but as being, a verb itself, that God is process, the whole universe is process, which means it's intrinsically creative and unpredictable. And so even there, they're looking to see if there's a way of changing the way we think about the stories that we're reading. You don't have to change the story. You just have to change the meanings that you find in the story.
Right.
So there's a way to be, to keep the continuity with the past, but not the meanings of the past.
Well, let me ask you this, Rabbi. How would you describe God, or how would you define God?
Well, first you have to say you can't define God, because God is, by definition, something we can't define. But having said that, let me define it.
Okay.
I define God as reality. If you that's that whole process theology idea. If I look at the Hebrew that we translate as Lord, which is a terrible translation in English Bibles, the actual Hebrew is a verb. It's unpronounceable, literally. It's just 4 consonants. But it's the future imperfect form of the Hebrew verb to be. So even back then, somebody had an insight that God wasn't static, that God was the beingness of the universe, and it's future imperfect. So It's always flowing, and it's never finished. And that, to me, makes sense, that God is the universe, and maybe beyond the universe, because I don't, there's that limit of human thought. So, but God is certainly everything that exists, and perhaps a greater source of that thing beyond it. But that's what I think. God is reality. So good and bad, up and down, all of those things. It's all part of the divine reality.
Tell me, Rabbi, when it comes to the book of Revelations, the apocalypse, how do you interpret that? Is it going to be the end of the world? Is Christ going to come down? Are there going to be the four horsemen of the apocalypse?
Yeah, well, luckily I'm not a Christian, so I don't have to worry about that book.
Oh, okay.
But what do I make of it?
Yes.
I think it was, well, first of all, it's an apocalyptic text written at the end of the first century, when a lot of Jewish people felt, the world was coming to an end, and here was this one Jewish guy with a belief in Jesus who saw Jesus as the vehicle for this. And it's a prophecy of what he thought was going to happen in that time, not 2,000 years later. The problem with apocalyptic books is that people then try to bring about the apocalypse. And the Jesus of the book of Revelation is frightening. And his tongue is a sword, and he's slaughtering all of these people. If I take it literally, then I have a brand new Jesus. I mean, it's the Jesus who's coming back is not the Jesus who preached nonviolence. It's a very violent Jesus.
Yeah. Just like be the God between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it seems, and this is just my opinion, Rabbi. The God of the Old Testament is very vengeful. He's very strict. He's very stern. You don't do it. It's his way or the highway. And if the highway isn't open, there's the Red Sea. Take a gander of cross and bang, away you go. Whereas the God of the New Testament, loving, compassionate, gave his only Son.
Yeah, well, you can say a couple of things. Number one, we as a Jew, we don't talk about Old Testament. We talk about Hebrew Scripture. But I get the point. But, it's written over 1,000 years. And the God ideas in the Bible, the God of Genesis 1 isn't vengeful. It's very abstract. It just speaks and the world comes into existence. You find a very mixed picture of God in the Hebrew Scripture because it's different books written by different people at different times, and they all disagree about what God is. So, you get very vengeful people who write about a very vengeful God. Because I don't believe in the God of the Bible, and I believe that the Bible is a human document, when I read about this vengeful God, I'm reading about a very angry, maybe powerless, frustrated, bitter, author who's just going to take revenge on those he hates by having his God do it for him because he can't do it himself. So I think we get more about the psychology of the author than we do about the theology. All
right, stand by, Rabbi. You and I have to take our final break. Thank you very much for joining us. Great pleasure talking to you, sir. Exonation Rabbi Rami is our special guest. Rabbi Rami Shapiro. His website is www.rabbirami.com, and that's RABBIRAMI.com. Don't go away. We'll be back. With each new extreme weather event or terrorist act, it becomes increasingly obvious that we live in uncertain and challenging times. We all buy car insurance. Why not collapse and catastrophe insurance? Matthew Stein, an MIT-trained engineer and green builder, has written 2 outstanding books to help people prepare, plan for, and deal with everything from minor situations lasting a few days to full-on collapse. Matt's first book, When Technology Fails, is a manual for self-reliance, sustainable living, and surviving the long emergency. This massive book covers the gamut from first aid and emergency preparedness to alternative healing, renewable energy, primitive living skills, and 18th century technologies that could be critical to your comfort and survival in a long-lasting crisis. Matt's second book, When Disaster Strikes, is a comprehensive emergency preparedness handbook and survival guide. When Disaster Strikes is an essential item for every family's go bag. Both books are available at all usual sources. There's a wealth of totally free information posted at whentechfails.com, and author-signed copies may be purchased at mattstein.com. That's www.whentechfails.com and www.mattstein.com.